It's tax season, and at LifeLock, we know you're tired of numbers. But here's a big one you need to hear. Billions. That's the amount of money in refunds the IRS has flagged for possible identity fraud. Now here's another big number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, we'll fix it guaranteed. One last big number. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/podcast for the threats you can't control. Terms apply.
Hey everyone, this is Meredith, and today I'm recording a solo show. My first ever me-only episode. Alex did one of these way back where she spent 40 minutes or so kind of just roasting me, but I've never been so bold. I find comfort in conversation. It's easier for me to get thoughts across that way. This format scares me a little because I don't get that, and I don't get the protection of sharing ownership of concepts. This one is all me. This is my perspective, and it's a pointed one. But it's one that I think may be helpful to hear, and if you find it helpful or thought-provoking, I hope you'll share it, because sharing is how important messages get around and break through the noise. Before I start on this episode, I want to say one quick thing. It's not meant to be a call-out. This isn't a lecture, and it's definitely not a pass or fail kind of thing. It's to name something I think a lot of people are feeling, which is a deep care and concern over what's been going on, while also feeling really unsure about what to do with all of that care and concern. If that's you, just know that this episode is for you, not about you. We're going to talk about joy, resistance, guilt, and responsibility. There will be some clarity, there might be a little discomfort, and hopefully there will be a few laughs, maybe. You don't have to agree with everything. You just need to, stay curious and stay open-minded here. Some backstory. This concept or this idea came to me while we were in Riviera Maya at Brandy Carlisle's Just Wanna Weekend, which is an amazing weekend and experience. You've probably heard our recap episodes on this, so I don't want to detract from that at all. Just know where the seed was planted. It was planted there. And to orient you a little bit, that event occurred just over a week or so after Renee Good was shot and killed in Minneapolis. Renee Good was a queer woman, as is most of Brandy's fan base, and the weight of the overlap in demographics was palpable and heavy that weekend. Brandy acknowledged this as well as she dealt with her own difficulty knowing how to give people permission to have fun and enjoy a weekend like this in the grander context of what was happening and is happening in the U.S. Community matters, togetherness matters, and art always matters in the context of creating change, and that's ultimately where she landed. And I thought this was great. A perfect acknowledgement that terrible things can be happening, and so can great things. The weekend was a great thing. And I want to pause here. Take a breath and understand that sometimes when people don't know what to say, but feel compelled to say something, they say the wrong thing. Things that sound nice, but are ultimately unhelpful and potentially even harmful. And I feel for people who are put into situations where they feel this pressure, but have not developed a well thought out thing to say. There are lots and lots of people at this festival, and while it's a largely queer community, it is somewhat of a monoculture of predominantly white queer women. And the lineup of artists, entertainers, and personalities reflect this monoculture, which is fine. I'm not here to call into question the diversity of the crowd here. I'm just painting the picture. On more than a few occasions, an artist or personality would say the words, and this is a quote, "Joy is resistance. Joy is resistance." I heard this so many times from so many people that I stopped being able to ignore the nagging irritation I would feel every time I heard it. There was something about that line that just felt off. Maybe it's the amount of reading I've done in the past few years on white feminism. Maybe it's that I'm a longtime reader and follower of James Baldwin, Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, Eddie Glaude, and others who write on the topic of civil rights and race in America. Because I find civil rights history to be fascinating and sort of horrific all at the same time, not only because it was literally a horrific thing that happened, but because it's kind of still happening. The racism, the issues, they didn't just go away. Or maybe I just have my eyes more open. I don't know. But that line, joy is resistance, just feels irritatingly and inescapably kind of useless. I want to start by making a distinction that I think that we've lost the ability to hold, especially in moments that are politically and kind of morally overwhelming, or maybe we just never had the ability to hold this at all. The fact that joy is real, joy is an innately human being feeling, joy is necessary, but joy is not resistance any more than resistance is joy. Resistance isn't a feeling. It's not a vibe. It's not a mindset. It's not like a candle scent, a playlist, or a well-timed brunch with your buddies on a Sunday. Although all of those things can be super nice. Resistance is more of a discipline, a practice. It takes time, attention, risk, and perhaps most importantly, there are consequences. That's kind of almost the point. Ironically, one of the only true displays of resistance that occurred at Brandy's Music Festival was delivered by Jasmine Forti, who is an extremely talented trans woman who fronts her supporting band, also made up of trans people. While she was on stage, the final day on Sunday, she told a personal story about an important gay woman in her life, kind of a mother figure, as well as a pro-Palestine activist who was part of this like large-scale arrest that's happened in London. She took the time to tell this story and then led a surprising and, yes, somewhat aggressive Free Palestine chant towards the end of her set. It was not joyful. This was not a joyful moment. It was not meant to be joyful, although she did return to her joy of performing. But the distinction between this moment and the rest of her set was stark. She did this probably knowing that it would not land with everyone. And boy, did it ever not land with everyone. The fallout on the Just Want a Weekend Facebook group was explosive. Let's just say Jasmine Forti didn't gain the fandom and admiration of everyone in attendance. But like I said, risk and consequence. And I want to be clear, I'm not anti-joy. I like joy. I schedule lots of joy into my life. I protect the joy in my life. I am emotionally invested in joy, continuing to exist for myself and others. What I want to talk about is what that language does, what it quietly lets us off the hook for, and why confusing joy with resistance can turn into a very soothing and lovely form of inaction, especially in moments that actually require focused, sustained effort like the one we're living in now. I've been mentioning James Baldwin a lot lately because I felt myself pulled back into his work specifically. If you're not familiar, James Baldwin was a renowned American writer, essayist, and civil rights activist born in Harlem, New York City. He's best known for exploring racial, class, and sexual tensions in works like Go Tell It on the Mountain and The Fire Next Time. He lived largely in France to escape the racism that he felt in America, and he became a prominent and eloquent voice for equality. He eventually returned to the U.S. and became an active and influential figure in the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. I consider Baldwin as a North Star in conversations like these because he, more than almost anyone else that I've read, speaks with eloquence and clarity on a vast number of emotional, political, racial, and societal topics that influenced and continue to influence the trajectory of the United States of America. One of my favorite quotes from Baldwin is this: "I love America more than any other country in this world, and exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually." Baldwin warned that the greatest danger in this country wasn't hatred, but innocence. the refusal to see ourselves clearly. And when we collapse a feeling like joy into resistance, we're doing exactly that. We replace action with affect. We confuse feeling better with doing better. This episode is about how we partition our emotional and intellectual resources when things are hard. It's about guilt, paralysis, awareness, and inaction. And it's about learning to hold more than one feeling at a time, which is something that minorities and marginalized people have been doing for centuries, whether they wanted to or not. Joy matters, and it's important, and I hope that comes through in what comes next. But joy can't do the work for us. One of the things that I respect most about Baldwin is that he never confused emotional comfort with moral progress. He believed deeply in love, but not as a sentiment. Love for Baldwin was an obligation, a practice, something that demanded honesty and accountability. I love that word, accountability. This is the part of loving America that those who tend towards nationalism have a really hard time with. Because accountability feels like an attack when you're not prepared to accept the impact, damages, and repercussions of a specific way of being or thinking. The United States has been and thought a certain way for a long time. And it is that certain way of thinking that a great number of people are clinging to right now, as they feel the threat of minorities encroach not on their rights, freedoms, or opportunities, but on their comfort. Just like a child feels resistance to being shaken awake from a slumber, much of America is feeling resistance to opening their eyes to truth and evolution. And the uncomfortable part of understanding this resistance is that you yourself may be resisting this exact same thing, even as you hold compassionate awareness of the atrocities that are going on in our world right now. Baldwin was deeply suspicious of guilt that didn't turn into responsibility, because guilt on its own is just a feeling that keeps the focus on you. Guilt is a sly way of keeping your own experience and comfort centered and cared for. It's a way of protecting your self-image. That distinction between guilt and responsibility is doing a lot of work in our current moment. So let's talk about our current moment. Donald Trump is doing basically everything that he said he would. You know how certain right-leaning folks, MAGA people in your family, maybe said, he won't do that. Don't take him seriously. He's not serious. He just says stuff. To quote Obama, everything a president says is serious. And he was serious. So here we are. During Donald Trump's administration, immigration enforcement, particularly but not exclusively through ICE, has become more publicly visible, more degrading, and more openly punitive. Harmful and hateful policies like family separation, expanded detention, and aggressive enforcement tactics have been widely criticized by human rights organizations for causing significant harm to people and to communities. In the midst of all the harms being done to immigrant families who, if they are undocumented, are likely just part of a system designed to extort them for being undocumented. But that's a podcast for a later time. Despite and in the midst of these harms, there are harms being done openly to U.S. citizens, and let's just say it, white people. There is a long, long history in the U.S. of violence against visible minorities. Much of that violence goes unnoticed, unchecked, and undocumented. Occasionally, there will be violence done with enough visibility to mobilize the masses, including white activists, but that's rare. Rodney King, Trayvon Martin, George Floyd. The difference in what matters here is that for many white Americans, especially white women, this was the first time state violence felt personally imaginable. Not because it was new, but because the proximity to the person changed. For generations, Black, Indigenous, immigrant, and other marginalized communities have lived with the knowledge that the U.S. can be very arbitrary, violent, and indifferent to their survival. That knowledge isn't shocking, it's inherited. What's new for many people now is not oppression, it's the identification with oppression. And identification can be powerful. It can crack denial. It can be the thing that breaks someone free of problematic thought patterns. This is why you're seeing a lot of Trump supporters finally pull their support from him. Alex Preddy getting shot in the street was like the breaking point, even though there are so many of us that are like, that's been going on for decades and worse. But awareness without direction often starts to produce guilt. And guilt, especially when it's new and unpracticed, tends to either explode outward or collapse inward. To also quote Baldwin, it has always been much easier to give a name to the evil without than to locate the terror within. A few years ago, I had a book recommended to me called Against White Feminism, Notes on Disruption. It's written by author Rafia Zakaria, and it is a pretty bold critique of Western feminism. And I don't say bold as in like, wow, it's bold to criticize Western feminism. I just mean it's a really boldly written book. And it was one that, as a white Western woman was kind of challenging to read at times, but really eye-opening. And so I would recommend that to anyone who identifies as a feminist and also happens to be white, because I think these concepts are super important. But the critique argues that Western feminism centers on the experience of white privileged women while ignoring or condescending towards women of color. She challenges the movement's colonial roots, the white savior or industrial complex, and the marginalization of non-white voices. It's a book on trickle-down feminism and the intentional or unintentional harm that can be done when white women center themselves through guilt and problematic and egotistical activism. Truly revolutionary to read. Black feminist thinkers and feminists of color have been clear on guilt for a long time. Audre Lorde reminded us that guilt is not a response to anger. It's a response to one's own lack of action. If it leads to change, then it can be useful, since it is then no longer guilt, but the beginning of knowledge. Yet all too often, guilt is just another name for impotence or defensiveness, destruction of communication. It becomes a device to protect ignorance and the continuation of things the way they are, the ultimate protection for changelessness. Bell Hooks warned that feminism that centers on personal comfort over collective liberation isn't transformative. It's just therapeutic to the person. And Mickey Kendall points out, very practically, that awareness doesn't feed people, it doesn't house people, and it doesn't keep families together. Here's the pattern that I keep seeing. Something awful becomes visible. Awareness for that awful thing spikes. Emotions spike. Guilt enters the chat. And instead of responsibility, we get emotional substitution. That's when you start hearing things like joy is resistance. Posting becomes action. Feeling becomes proof. Because if joy is resistance, then I don't have to resist. I just have to feel okay again. I just have to feel joy. They don't want us, the people who care, to feel joy. They want us to be sad and miserable. So joy must be resistance. Us being joyful must be making them really mad. That's how we will impact change. We will show them how joyful we are. And honestly, that's super tempting, especially if you're not used to being uncomfortable for long periods of time. But I promise you, whoever they are, don't care about your joy. This brings me to the emotional partitioning part of the podcast. I believe all humans are capable of this, but some may require more practice than others. Top-tier intelligence and emotional regulation requires us. It requires the ability to hold two opposed ideas or feelings in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. It's the ability to function that ends up being really important for life and doing actual work. And we'll get to that. Think of it like this. Do you remember those plates that we had as kids? Or maybe you have kids, and so you just own these plates, but they're the ones with the little sections where you put your different foods in the different sections so they don't touch. I guess it like teaches kids something about food. I don't know. But that's what we want with emotions and feelings. We want joy in the, maybe like the vegetable area, grief, hopefully in the smaller area, but sometimes it goes in the big area. Rage has its own area. Action gets its own like sturdy compartment. We do not want an emotional casserole. We do not want to be mixing things together because that just makes everything bad and like useless. No boundaries, no structure, just one big like gooey emotional bake that leaves you feeling overwhelmed, immobilized, and like vaguely but indescriptibly resentful. I said that some people may require more practice because some people just don't grow up having to do this, while others definitely do. Many minorities learned to use this plate early in life because you had to. Joy didn't cancel grief. Grief didn't cancel responsibility. You learned to eat your vegetables and still have your dessert. For those who were born into more privilege, and I would put myself in this category of people, they didn't have to learn to use this plate. They got to eat casseroles made with ingredients that go super well together. No need to separate. No need to act through discomfort. This was not a requirement for survival. When people feel emotionally flooded right now, unable to feel joy without guilt, unable to act because everything feels like too much, this isn't a failure. This is a lack of practice. It's a skill gap. And it's the same skill gap that leads people towards emotional substitution, labeling joy as resistance. That's the emotional equivalent of scraping your peas off your plate while no one's looking. The good news is, if this is a skill gap, skills are learnable. Skills can be learned. So what is resistance, actually? Well, it's not glamorous. It's not social media, usually. It's often boring, it's repetitive, it's probably inconvenient, and it doesn't come with a dopamine hit. Probably isn't going to get you attention, but it does require sustained attention. Probably requires giving something up, maybe multiple things: time, comfort, money, certainty. It requires choosing focus over just engaging with noise. Speaking of noise, it probably requires getting off social media so much. It requires picking up the phone and calling your representatives. It requires researching organizations to get involved with and asking them how you can help. And then when they tell you, it requires you actually following through and helping those organizations. It requires you stepping out of your experience, which probably means stepping into discomfort. It requires risk, and it requires consequence, or at least owning the consequence. But most importantly, it requires action. You have to do something, which is exactly why joy is so tempting as a substitute, because joy feels good. It does. It's convenient. It doesn't require sustained attention. You may not have to give anything up. You can have joy and be on social media. You don't have to get involved in things that you aren't currently involved with. It requires you to do nothing. It feels important, though, to hover on joy for just a moment. Because joy is not bad, and feeling joy is not betrayal. Joy is often necessary for survival, especially for people who are being oppressed. But oppressed people have never mistaken joy for resistance. Joy exists alongside resistance. Now, here's a caveat that's going to sound super contradictory, but hang in there. For some people, joy is resistance. And I know, I've just recorded like 20 plus minutes saying the opposite, but I saved this for now to hopefully drive a concept home. If a person exists as a part of a marginalized community where displaying their joy publicly could put them in danger from the powers that be, then displaying that joy is a form of resistance. A perfect example of this was Bad Bunny's halftime show. I hope you watched it. It was joyful. If you didn't watch it, hit pause right now. Go watch it. It was pure celebration. And what did a bunch of conservatives and MAGA people in the US do about it when they saw it? They raged. They raged. Choosing to put on a joyful display of music in his native tongue on the biggest stage in the world as a Latino man in 2026 is full-on, undisputable resistance. But there is a clear difference between Bad Bunny acting out joy, acting it out, doing joy. There is a difference between that and saying, as a white woman, joy is resistance. Joy is resistance is a phrase and a line of thinking that people use when they want to resume whatever it was they were doing before they felt inconvenienced by their emotions and the lack of clear productive path forward to use them. Joy is resistance is a permission slip to go back to your super normal life. I know that sounds so brutal. Don't get mad. Just hear it. Because what I want to end with is permission, but not abdication. You and everyone on this planet are allowed joy. You don't have to earn it. You are allowed rest. You don't have to earn it. You are allowed happiness, pleasure, laughter, beauty, music, in all of the pure joys in this world. You don't have to earn a single one. But those joys do not replace responsibility. And feeling things deeply, and I'm saying this as someone who feels things deeply, does not exempt us from acting deliberately. If you feel overwhelmed or paralyzed, that doesn't mean that you're uncaring. It may simply mean that you've never had to hold this many truths at once. That's not a character flaw, it's a capacity issue. So how do you build that capacity? You start small. You choose one place that feels approachable and you put sustained attention on that place. Not everything, not forever, not all at once. Just something that's very real. Cancel your Amazon subscription. Cancel Hulu. Use the 5 Calls app. Start buying from local stores. Reach out to a nonprofit and see how you can help. Listen more than you speak. Step back and look for real leaders and then follow their lead, but follow through on something and start small. That's my best advice, because the small things are usually super tangible things. They're probably attached to your wallet, which is the way that most people can impact change right away. The power of the dollar and what you spend your money on is very real. It's very real. So keep your focus on where your time, energy, and your money is going, because that's going to be the easiest change to make. In life, in everyday life, we can talk about building emotional capacity in the same way that we talk about building the skill of emotional resilience. So the practice is in consuming and not absorbing. And this is a really important bit of advice for life on the internet, especially on Instagram, where you're just going to have things and information and horrible videos and horrible pictures put in your face. You can get off of Instagram at any time, by the way, and TikTok and any other social media app. But it is a great way to stay connected. And so I guess the better bit of advice is maybe not to get off of those apps entirely, but be more strategic with how you're engaging with them. Consume information, don't absorb it. Don't allow it into your bones. Practice putting things down. Literally, practicing putting your phone down is a great way to start that. But practice feeling an emotion and then putting it down. Practice feeling happiness, grief, fear, joy, anxiety, compassion, love, wretchedness. Name all of these feelings, hold them, and let each feeling be its own experience. If you journal, you can journal about this practice if you're inclined to do so. If you don't journal, maybe now is a good time to start journaling, because we experience things so fast and so rapidly that it's hard to name things unless you're intentional about naming things. The question, what am I feeling right now, is one of the most important questions that we can get in the habit of asking ourselves, because your body and your nervous system may be feeling things that you are just completely unaware of. And that can lead to that sort of nondescript overwhelm. And when you live with that type of overwhelm, you just become paralyzed because you blast through your capacity without even realizing it. But these practices, these little things, however you choose to do them, this is how you build your capacity for more. If more is what you want from yourself, this is how you do it. Resistance isn't about heroism or purity. Resistance isn't performative. It's not about what you put in your Instagram story. Resistance doesn't require that people on social media even know what it is that you care about and what you're doing. Resistance is just, it's a practice, and it requires consistency. And while you practice it, keep your joy. Just don't ask joy to do the work that only your action can do. And with that, I want to say thank you for listening to me on this topic. I realize it was a big one. I'm going to include a list of references, authors, and resources that I mentioned or that I've found just generally helpful for me as I've developed this outlook over time. I hope that this short podcast is the start of a much longer investigation into systemic oppression and the quiet tools in our society that empower it. Because while awareness doesn't solve anything, it's the requirement, it's the beginning and the precursor to creating change.